Right, so for today's video, we're going to be talking about some podcast drama, and more specifically, some stolen podcast drama. Or at least that's what the accusations are, and we have a lot to get through for today's video, so let me add some context to this. So there's two main people to be aware of, the first one being Chloe Madison, a TikToker with 7,500 followers. Chloe is also the co-owner of a podcast. It's called the Unbothered Podcast. It's got over 500,000 followers on TikTok, but it wasn't always called this, and that will become a lot more clear a little bit later on. The second person to be aware of is Emma Page, who has 15,500 followers and is the owner of a podcast called Too Much. As we can see, the TikTok account has over 100,000 followers, so the way I've introduced this, you'd probably think that these are two podcasts that are going at each other. That's the drama here. And in fact, that's not really the case at all. I mean, they have two separate podcasts now at this point, but that wasn't always the case. Because Emma and Chloe used to have a podcast together called the Unhinged Podcast. And in fact, a big reason as to why the Unbothered Podcast has over 500,000 followers is because this used to be the account for the Unhinged Podcast. It's just been rebranded. Now, I personally wasn't aware of any of these podcasts before I found out about this situation, but the way I actually found out about this was because I saw a video on my For You page uploaded by the Too Much Podcast, which is hosted by Emma. And as we can see right here, this video has 9.7 million views in just a few days. And it's basically a short clip from her podcast episode that she had just uploaded, and it got my attention.
It's been 2 months since I have been erased from the existence of my own podcast. 2 months since the Unbothered podcast has been operating on my accounts without my consent and without compensating me for my half of the business as a 50-50 partner. I am at a loss and I am done keeping quiet. There is only one person whose peace my silence is keeping, and it is not mine. Everything I'm about to say comes bearing receipts and is completely factual. This is the account of what actually happened to my podcast, Unhinged.
Okay, so we get the basic gist of it here, right? And obviously we're going to go into a lot more detail in just a second, but from that clip alone, before we even get to the podcast episodes, we can see there's a dispute over this podcast account. Or should I say all the social media accounts regarding this podcast. They obviously had a podcast together called Unhinged. Emma claims she's been locked out of the account, and now Chloe is using the account but rebranded it to her own podcast. And from what I can tell, this seems to be a situation that's been going on for some time now, like a couple of months, right? And fans of this podcast have kind of been left without answers for quite some time now. There's been some like vague remarks here and there, but it wasn't up until recently that we started getting some answers. So the first time we start hearing some answers is actually on Emma's Instagram account, where she uploads a 2-minute and 52-second video basically saying that she has been locked out of the account. Now bear in mind, this video was uploaded about 12 weeks ago, so this is before the TikTok video that I showed you earlier on.
I know there's been a lot of confusion with what's going on with Unhinged. I wish I had better news. I wish I had any information, but I do not. I have not spoken to my co-host since January 2nd, and as of this past weekend, January 17th, I have been locked out of every single shared account that we had together. For some context, I have been extremely unhappy with the way things were going for the past year and a half, and ultimately just wasn't working out. And I tried so hard to keep it going and to salvage things. I didn't want to abandon our audience, but in doing so, I was abandoning myself and my mental health. So I made the very difficult decision to propose that we dissolve the partnership.
So now at this point, Emma goes on to talk about like the dispute over the ownership. I'm not going to show the rest of this because we get like way more detail in the podcast episode. But as you can see, Emma's uploaded this video saying she's been locked out of the accounts, right? So obviously people are like curious as to what's actually happened here, looking for another side of the story, seeing what Chloe has to say about it, and Chloe does actually respond. Now this response was posted on the once Unhinged Spotify account, now being rebranded to Unbothered. It was posted on March 31st and it's called The End of Unhinged. Emma starts off the episode by saying that Unhinged is over and she will be making her own podcast now.
Unhinged is officially over. That chapter has closed and it is done. It will not continue on in any form. However, today is the start of my new independent podcast called Unbothered.
Chloe goes on to talk about her relationship with Emma. She says that Emma had said something disrespectful to her that Chloe felt like she was owed an apology for, and then Emma refused to apologize.
A few months ago, there were some very disrespectful things said to me, and I set a firm boundary that required an apology and a change of behavior in order to continue filming. I was told that I would not be getting an apology, and that resulted in a domino effect that became the end of Unhinged.
We then hear some more details of the time that Emma decided that she was going to be leaving the podcast, and Chloe goes on to say that this was around the same time as the LA fires.
Then a few days later, I followed up to ask if she was quitting the podcast. I was told that Unhinged could not continue without her and that she was done. So while I took some time to try to figure out what my next best move would be for myself, for Unhinged, the California wildfires happen. I'm in a mandatory evacuation zone, so I'm with Colin. We're throwing my shit into a car. We're getting our pets, like we are in fight or flight mode, figuring out where we're going and how long we're going to be there.
And around this time, Chloe says that Emma was still trying to follow up with messages, like asking about what is going to be happening with the account now that she is leaving. And obviously, Chloe is saying that this is around the time of the fires and she's evacuating. Now, at this point, Chloe goes on to say that Emma was the first person to lock Chloe out of some of the social media accounts. Obviously, when we heard the story previously, Emma is saying that Chloe did this. So very different stories, it seems.
And just being like, hey, follow us on Instagram. I wake up the following day. I get a text on my phone that is like, somebody's trying to get your TikTok thing, and I am locked out of the accounts. And I receive an email from Emma that says that she's changed the account information. And unless I can come to an agreement with her on Zoom about the future of the podcast, I'm not going to get the passwords back. I'm actually going to put the email on the screen because this is something that Emma took to her social media to say that I did.
Okay, right, so let's take a little look through this email, right? So it's from Emma and it says, Dear Chloe, despite my multiple attempts to resolve this matter amicably and bring our partnership on the Unhinged podcast to a close, you have repeatedly ignored my communications and failed to honor our agreement regarding shared ownership of the podcast assets. As a result, I have no choice but to take action to protect the integrity of our shared platforms. To be clear, I have taken a step of changing the login credentials to our social media accounts to prevent further unauthorized activity from either party as direct response to your actions until we can come to a resolution regarding the future of Unhinged. This is not my first nor preferred course of action. Now, when we get to Emma's response, which is very detailed, right? It's like 50 minutes long. Obviously, Chloe's episode here is about 9 minutes long. So there's a lot more information that we are about to get to. We do see that this email has definitely been cropped in a certain way, right? And it does feel like there is some important context missing to this. Now, was this the right decision for Emma to do? Maybe not, right? We'll get into a lot more of that later on. But just regarding this email, I'll say this, like, there's a big chunk of this that has been cropped, and it does miss some pretty important context where you might still have the same opinions and might think it's wrong or right, whatever you believe, but it could also definitely change your opinions if you have the added context. Chloe then goes on to talk about how Emma has made like a video on Instagram that we spoke about earlier, talking about everything that happened from her point of view, and Chloe believes that Emma did this just to promote her podcast.
It feels to me like a grab for attention via like a note out of the Call Her Daddy, Sophia Franklin, Alex Cooper breakup manual. I am not a fan of how she tried to use drama between us in a public manner to promote her new podcast. This is so far from how I wanted things to go.
And then Chloe ends the video by saying that this situation could have been a chance for two women to uplift each other, but now it's just one woman doing it and like kind of goes on to promote Emma's podcast.
And what it could have been was two women lifting each other up and supporting each other's new business ventures. And though there may not be two of us doing that, there will be one. And I encourage you guys to go listen to her new podcast. It is called Too Much. I believe it is on Spotify as well as Apple. I know that you loved us for our differing opinions. I don't want you to feel like children of divorce and like you have to choose sides.
Okay, so this episode was uploaded on March 31st. If you go over to the now Unbothered Podcast, this is now the first video. So all the videos that were made as Unhinged have been deleted. But as we can see here, the same account has carried on being used, it's just been rebranded, right? So a bunch more episodes have came out since this. And now that brings us to 2 days ago as I'm recording this video right now, because on the Too Much podcast hosted by Emma, she has uploaded a very long and detailed video going into what has happened here from her point of view. She starts off by saying that this has been going on for weeks now, but she is finally ready to talk about it.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Too Much. I have waited 14 weeks to record and post this episode. It's something that most of you, if not all of you, have been questioning, wondering about, reaching out to me about. and I'm finally ready to talk about it.
We then see Emma talk about the same stuff we saw in the TikTok video, basically saying she's been locked out of her account. It's literally the same clip. That is the clip that has been uploaded. That's the next part of the podcast. And then goes on to give some more details of how the Unhinged podcast was actually split, and it was 50-50.
In May of 2023, I started Unhinged with this girl that I hardly knew. The partnership was 50-50 from the start. And although there was no official contract in place, there are checklists on checklists that kept track of our equal split of work for the last year and a half.
Emma then goes on to say that the podcast quickly went viral, all was well, but only just a few months into actually hosting the podcast, there was clearly some differences and their relationship was getting worse. After a year of doing the podcast, Emma started questioning whether she actually wanted to do this or she wanted to leave. And in the end, Emma ultimately decided that she did want to leave the podcast. So this is where the dispute starts. And because they run this podcast together, which obviously some people might be thinking, hey, it's just a podcast, who cares? It's obviously like a business as well, right? It was both their full-time thing, I believe. And now they have to decide how they're going to go forward with the podcast. Now, from Emma's point of view, it is very clear that she believes that the podcast shouldn't exist if it's not going to be the two of them, unless Chloe wants to purchase the 50% that Emma owns.
On January 2nd, I received a text asking if I would be, and I quote, quitting the podcast. And if I did not respond to that, it would be assumed that I was. So I responded back stating it needs to be very clear that without the two of us, Unhinged would not exist. Which is reasonable, given it was a 50-50 partnership, and I could acknowledge that. I can acknowledge that without the two of us together, it can't exist. It can't go on. The platforms cannot go on. And at that point, I told her to expect a detailed email from me in the coming days.
Emma then sends her notice of leave. It's like a big letter basically saying, like, I don't want the podcast to end, but like there's something in me that's telling me like it needs to end. Clearly something didn't feel right. It even goes into some details about like what they could maybe do to try and keep the podcast running. I'll show it on screen right now if you want to have a read through. But there's some like pointers here saying like posting TikToks when we can, reaching out to brands when we can, or once a month basis, and so on, so on. Like I said, it's a long email. Now after sending this, Emma says that she was just ghosted, received no response.
Now here's where it gets interesting. My business partner, who I spoke to every single day for 18 months, ghosted me for 25 days.
Yeah, so you can see it's not exactly just like a slow reply or anything like that. Apparently just didn't receive a message for 25 days. Now, obviously, as we heard earlier from Chloe's point of view, she is saying that this happened like around the time of the LA fires. Emma says that the original conversation started like a few days before, but either way, they agree that the LA fires were around this time. But then at this point, Emma goes on to talk about how Chloe would still reply to brands on behalf of their account, but at the same time, not replying to Emma.
On January 7th, now 4 days after the initial email was sent, a brand that we had signed a deal with reached out to us asking a question via text. I had still not received a response from my co-host. And without consulting me, which was a standard operating procedure, she responded to the brand, alluding to our disarray and claiming that we would be getting back to them, which in my mind, in my opinion, is completely unprofessional.
So at this point, Emma starts speaking to lawyers, right? Because she doesn't know what's happening here with this account. Obviously, the communication isn't very good. And the lawyers confirm, or at least this is what Emma says, that they will definitely be considered 50-50 owners of the accounts.
Now, since 2 weeks had gone by since my first attempt at getting in touch, I started consulting with a couple of lawyers. Nothing official yet, but I needed to get my ducks in a row. And I was going to do this by the book with integrity. I was advised to send a formal notice of dissolution and propose the next steps. And what was made clear to me was that even though we did not have a contract on paper, under New York state law, which is where we started the podcast, we are considered an implied partnership, which holds up in the court of law. And that we are both co-owners of this podcast and all of its associated accounts due to the split of work, profit sharing, the name's use in commerce, and public representation as co-owners. I mean, it was even in both of our Instagram bios. Half of Unhinged.
And then we see that Emma sent Chloe a notice of dissolution. It's right here, basically saying like, we are 50-50 owners and I think it's in our best interest if we dissolve the company or the podcast. Emma then also sends Chloe some example stories that they could post because they were supposed to have a podcast episode coming up, and they basically say like, hi Unhinged fans, we're taking a pause this week. If you're looking to get a much needed laugh in, here's one of our favorites. So this is just an example of what they could post, obviously considering that they're not going to be uploading a podcast that week. Emma then also sends Chloe an example of a post that they could make talking about about the fact that the podcast is no longer going to be happening, right? It says, after an incredible journey, we've made the difficult decision to end Unhinged. This podcast has been such a special part of our lives, and we're so grateful for the love, laughs, and support you've shown us along the way. Thank you for being a part of this adventure with us. While this chapter is closing, the memories and connections we built with you will always hold a special place in our hearts. As well as a second slide that says, if you'd like to keep up with Emma and Chloe, you can follow them at their below accounts, and it has Emma's name, Chloe's name. I assume it would have like the social media handles below that. But after sending all this, Emma says that Chloe still just doesn't respond. And instead of responding, Chloe ends up posting an Instagram story on the account herself.
However, later that night, I went on Instagram and I saw a story go live on our shared account that said, "We are taking a pause because of the fires." Let me remind you, still no communication. None. And I had just sent an email a couple hours ago with a formal notice of dissolution and asking her to approve my suggested story. I'm still asking for approval because that was the checks and balance system that we had in place. Nothing like this went live without discussing it. So I went onto our account, I took a screenshot, I took the story down, and I texted her and I said, "I just sent you a notice of dissolution. You cannot be posting things like this without discussing it with me first."
And then this is where we get to the whole like locked out of account situation, right? So as we heard earlier, Emma posts this video saying that Chloe has locked her out of all the accounts. Chloe then responds saying, "No, Emma did this first. She locked me out of multiple accounts." Now we have a third video where Emma goes into more details and we find out that Emma was actually the first person to lock Chloe out of the account, and she says that this was legal advice from her lawyers and said that this would be legal as long as you make it clear that I will give you the passwords to the accounts. Let's just talk about this.
On January 17th, officially 2 weeks after I sent my first attempt at amicably dissolving the podcast, I was at wit's end. I needed to do something. I asked a lawyer, how do I get her to respond if I'm not like banging on her actual door? Like what do I do? I was moving ahead with my launch of Too Much. I just felt completely at a loss. I did not know what to do. The legal advice I received was to change 1 to 2 passwords while offering to share the passwords directly to my co-host in efforts to initiate a conversation, to get her attention, and hopefully try to just get a response. So that's what I did. It was a business move and a legal one. What I was told by this lawyer was that as long as there was no proof that I withheld the passwords and there was proof that I offered them up, that this was totally legal to do. So I did it. I changed only the Instagram and TikTok passwords, and I did it at the exact same time as sending an email to my co-host explaining.
Oh, okay, so here we actually do see the rest of the email that was kind of cropped in Chloe's response. Now, I will say, I'm not sure if this was really like the smartest thing to do. Clearly, it probably wasn't, right? It's caused this massive issue that we'll get into more details about in just a second. I'm not really sure what the ideal approach would be, right, if she can't actually get in touch with Chloe, so I understand like she was trying to get her attention or anything, but clearly this spiraled into something worse, right? There is more to this email that wasn't really shown, and it says here, since January 3rd, my first attempt at amicably dissolving this podcast, the issues I need to address are as follows: failure to respond, unauthorized communication with brands, posting without approval. If you wish to regain access to these accounts, I'm happy to provide you with the necessary credentials. Please set up a time for a phone call or a Zoom call to ensure a secure transfer of information, and we can align on the future of the podcast and its assets during. So of course, Emma says that the reason why this is legal is because she is saying here, like, you can have the accounts, let's just talk about it. And again, clearly this wasn't the best advice because Chloe ends up responding to this by locking Emma out of all of the accounts.
Again, I got no response. I believe we're at email 4 and day 14. So instead of a response within a few hours, I was locked out of not only our Instagram and TikTok, but every single joint account that I had with my business partner. I'm talking Spotify, which is our streaming host, which means Apple, Amazon, Audible, everything. Our Gmail account, our joint email that we communicated with brands on, with external partners, everyone. So essentially all of my contacts I was locked out of. Our Descript account, which is what we edit all of the episodes on, all of our content lives in there, all of our TikToks, everything, and every other social media platform that we had, but those are the important ones. Now, unlike what I did, I was not given any notice. There was no communication, and there was no offer of regaining access.
Yeah, I mean, what I assume has happened here is that Chloe has seen that she's been locked out of 2 accounts, and obviously I know Emma's saying this was like legal advice, whatever, but I guess from Chloe's point of view, she's saying, oh wow, she's actually locking me out of these accounts and I don't have access to these anymore. I'm going to make sure that I have access to all the other accounts and lock Emma out instead as kind of like retaliation. Now the problem being here is that it's obviously been a few weeks since this, and Emma still doesn't have access to any of these accounts that she was a co-owner of. You would like to think if Chloe did do this as retaliation and more of just like a safety measure to make sure she still has access to some of the accounts and doesn't get locked out all of them, like you would like to think they would maybe communicate, and actually talk it through and see what they're going to do about these accounts. But it seems like that doesn't really happen. And from Emma's point of view here, it really does seem like Chloe's response to this is like, you have a few options, Emma, but if you don't agree to any of them, I'm going to keep the accounts and do what I want with them. And in fact, from what we can tell here, the initial offer that Chloe gives Emma is saying like, I'm going to keep the accounts, but you can have 15% of the earnings for 3 months.
On January 27th, now 24 days after my first attempted communication, I heard from my co-host for the first time. She essentially told me that she was going to keep Unhinged, and she claimed that she owned all of the platforms because allegedly she started them, aka signed us up, and that she was willing to give me 15% of the revenue for the next 3 months.
And then Emma goes on to give her thoughts on that offer, which I'm sure you can probably imagine aren't great.
I am at a loss for words. I have never been so insulted in my entire life. And like I said before, every aspect, down to email responses to brands, the posting schedule, the editing schedule, every aspect of that podcast was a 50-50 split. Even the Instagram posts were 1-to-1. Today, me, tomorrow, you. And I was being told that my contribution for the last year and a half was only worth 15% of what a 600,000 follower brand would bring in for the next 3 months. The other option that I was provided was 50% of the next 3 brand deals, which was equally as insulting.
Now, Emma goes on to say that she was about to send like a really lengthy kind of like angry email back saying that that's an insulting offer, but instead decides to just write this short email that says, I will review your claims and proposal with my attorney. Expect my counter proposal next week. In the meantime, all unhinged accounts shall remain inactive until this matter is resolved and agreed upon by both parties. To which Chloe then responds to this, basically saying, I'm glad to hear you're open to working this out amicably. To that end, we need to come to a signed agreement by Monday night. I will send over the contract for you to review shortly. And I think it's fair to say Emma wasn't very happy that she was now being given a deadline after she'd been ignored for so long.
Naturally, this pissed me off because 1, how can you give me a deadline when you've just ghosted me for 25 days? Doesn't really seem fair. Number 2, you locked me out of all of my accounts. And number 3, you just provided me an insulting offer, implying that I practically had nothing to do with the success of Unhinged.
So then we see that Emma responds, basically trying to like show proof that there's a 50-50 ownership here. She writes things like, we have equally contributed to the podcast growth, shared responsibilities, and split profits 50-50. Under partnership law, this establishes joint ownership, and then there's a lot more details you can pause to read if you want to. Emma doesn't receive a response to this, so the next day she sends another email basically saying like, I need to gain access to the accounts that you've locked me out of. She lists them here: Gmail, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, Descript, and PayPal. But then instead of a response, Emma says that it's at this point that the accounts are just rebranded.
On February 4th, 2025, I woke up to the unthinkable. My podcast, Unhinged, was gone. I was erased from its existence. And in its place was a new podcast, Unbothered. And there was an actual video about me using my name on my platforms. So if it's not clear what this all means, all of the work that I had done for a year and a half, every word I put out into the world, every single Instagram post, graphic that I made, reel, was gone. The logo was changed. I was deleted from the bio. Every tagged video of me was gone. Every single one of the 80 episodes that we released on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon was gone. The podcast itself was changed across every single platform. Yet there were still 93,000 Instagram followers, 500,000 followers on TikTok, 20,000 followers on Spotify. Every one of those 600,000 people consented to follow Unhinged.
not unbothered.
And then at this point we hear some more details. Emma says that her friends and family, and obviously Emma herself, are blocked from all these social medias as well, so they can't see what's going on. Emma then goes on to mention the fact that Chloe showed that email in her video but left out the context. And then Emma says for the last 2 months both their lawyers have been speaking to each other, but clearly it's not going very well.
But that is where the communication began with my lawyer and my ex-co-host lawyer. For 2 months straight, my lawyer has been going back and forth with hers to come to a settlement that would be fair for both of us. But it has been unsuccessful.
And now at this point we're kind of getting to the final thoughts here. So Emma goes on to talk about the ownership and says that if Chloe really wanted to carry on the podcast, she should have purchased the 50% that she didn't own.
I also understand that I am the one who wanted to walk away from Unhinged. However, when you are in business with someone who is your equal partner, you own 50%. I wanted to dissolve the platforms completely because, in my eyes, it is not fair for one person to ride the coattails of what we created together. I was also confident in myself that I could do this on my own. I grew one podcast, I could do it again. But of course, I know dissolving is not the only course of action in business. If one person wants to continue on with the business and own 100% of it, they must purchase the 50% that they do not own in one form or another, however they want to compensate the business partner for that 50%. And that price is calculated based on the valuation of the business, the current revenue stream, and the partner's contribution.
Emma then goes on to talk about how Chloe has responded in the comment section of a lot of her videos saying like they were Chloe's accounts, as in she made them physically with her own email and whatnot. Emma then responds to that saying like, that's not the case. We did 50-50 here. Like you created some accounts, I created some.
Also, to clear something up, if you didn't catch me saying this earlier, I started the Spotify account and the Instagram account and the Gmail account. That's something that I never thought would matter. But since my ex-co-host is claiming that she started them all, and that because of that, that gives her sole ownership and the right to keep the accounts, I just wanted to make that known.
Then we all see some text messages that Emma is showing to kind of like prove that she made some of the accounts. It says here, "We're Unhinged is available on IG, should I snag? We should take BTS today and tomorrow and tag so people start to follow as teaser content. Is that Unhinged available to stay consistent? Actually, yes, I'll snag. Perfect, thank you." We then see some other messages where Emma says, "Also, I made us a Gmail and signed us up to Spotify, sends the email address and the password." So yeah, judging from these messages, it does seem like Emma definitely did create some of the accounts. And now the most recent update that we have about all of this is that the lawyers are trying to come to some settlement. Obviously, Emma is saying that she wants to be compensated as a 50-50 partner if the company is going to carry on, which it seems like it is. And according to Emma, Chloe's response to all of this is $5,000.
This past week, I was offered $5,000 for Unbothered to continue operating on my owned accounts. $5,000 for a 600,000 follower brand. We were quoting brands at $8,000 to $12,000 per TikTok. And that is what my ex-co-host is offering me. Now, in business, if you cannot afford or you refuse to pay someone for their half of the business, the result is not that you get to just refuse and keep going and keep using the business and running it as usual. You forfeit the right to keep the business. For either of us to keep the business, it gets dissolved. Yet Unbothered is still up and running on those accounts.
Yeah, so clearly it seems like this is going to carry on for some time. It seems like this is going to go further legally by the looks of it, unless they do come to some type of an agreement. Chloe did actually respond to this on Instagram. Let me just find the response quickly. It's going to be pretty hard to read and pretty bad quality here, because I've had to zoom in quite a lot to see it. But basically it says, "I've remained silent because we've been in the middle of a confidential legal settlement. Unlike the other party, I followed legal counsel and respect that process. A handful of you have seen one side, out of context screenshots, and have formed opinions without seeing what has actually transpired behind closed doors. I have many receipts ready to go and I'll be sharing my side." So it looks like we are going to get a video from Chloe, which I'm sure will be very different to Emma's story. And at the end of the day, we don't really know what the truth is, right? Because we're not involved. All we're seeing is what each party wants to share. And I guess when we see both sides of the story, we can get more of like a concrete opinion of what we think has happened here. Obviously, we have seen some parts of both sides of the story, right? I mean, we've seen the 10-minute video that Chloe uploaded on the podcast account. We've also seen like a much longer podcast that Emma uploaded, going into a lot more detail. So I assume now Chloe is going to upload an episode that is a lot longer, going into a lot more detail. And we'll see what happened. If you want to see a part 2, let me know in the comment section down below. And also, based on the information we have here, let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think has happened here, and I'm going to leave the video there. So if you did enjoy, please leave a like down below, subscribe if you are new. Also, my girlfriend Emily and I have a channel where we upload like gaming and reaction videos to try and have fun on there. So if that's something that interests you, that's always linked in the description. And until the next one, I'll see you guys in a bit. Alright, goodbye.